So now I'm going to turn it over to New York Restoration Project and Seaweed City for presenting today workshop facing climate change as urban gardeners. And I'm going to pass the baton back to DK.
P, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. Grand evening. We are so excited to welcome you for a topic that I know at New York Restoration Project comes up for us often. We are absolutely positively giddy over our guests today, our very own New York Restoration Project, Jason Smith, who will do his own introduction momentarily, and our community partners at Seaweed City. But before we do that, I am the Director of Community Engagement, proudly at New York Restoration Project, where we steward over 80 acres of parksland in northern Manhattan. We steward 50 plus gardens citywide. We offer an array of free virtuals, in-persons, and city events open to families everywhere. And you can find our information on nyrp.org, as well as follow us at NYRP on Instagram. We are engaging with a climate change collaboration with GreenThumb, of which we began our series in September with the topic of mobilizing gardens as climate hubs. We talked about the power of gardens to be wonderful resources and activation spaces to talk about matters that are important to us. We realize that we're facing so many challenges with climate change that affect us and impact us financially, holistically, just environmentally. And we're continuing this conversation tonight with the impact of climate change on water. In November, we will come back again in mid-November to talk about the impact of climate on our holistic well-being, very specifically climate grief. We will take a break in December, and then we will come back in February and January with more exciting topics that community members just like you told us are important to you and that we need to be addressing. Without further ado, I could not be more proud to pass the baton to Seasonal Engagement Coordinator with the New York Restoration Project, who will be our lead facilitator for this illustrious panel discussion, Nyjah Ransom. Nyjah,
Oh,
take it away.
what what accolades. Thank you, DK. I'm very excited to be your MC for the night. Like DK mentioned, we have our very own Jason Smith and our community partner, Seaweed City, to talk a bit about water and climate, talk about their work, and then I'm going to jump into a conversation with them a little bit later on and go through a bit of a discussion about how we as New Yorkers, we as gardeners can have an impact, a positive impact on water here in our city. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let Jason get started on our conversation for tonight. So passing it on to you, Jason.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Jason Smith. I'm the director of parks in Northern Manhattan for New York Restoration Project. That's work I've been doing for over 18 years. Um, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about and engage in dialogue about water and how we can adapt to how it's changing in our city. It's a big and important topic. A little bit about me, just so you know what I can contribute. Throughout those years of working in park space in Northern Manhattan, a big part of our work has been learning about the landscape, which includes intertidal wetlands, lawns and gardens, a small farm, as well as forest and streets and sewers and broken streets and figuring out how to not just like improve and manage that landscape, but how do we adapt it to a rapidly changing world? And that has been a challenge and a great opportunity. And we've learned a lot through doing in that landscape and trial and error. And we've had some real great successes. And one piece of that has really been thinking about how we manage water. And when I was reflecting for this talk, I realized like a lot of what we do is actually a bunch of different ways of slowing water down. And that can be something we think about in the farm, can be something we think about when we build a rain garden or install a rainwater harvesting tank, also, when we work to restore wetlands or create oyster gardenings, a lot of that is about kind of slowing down the water. You know, New York is like a busy town for all of us, and the same holds true for our water. We have a lot of compacted soils and impermeable surfaces in the city, and so the water naturally wants to run off of the city surfaces, and that like drives a very different kind of water cycle that's part of New York. And as gardeners, we can intervene in that and try to slow it down. And that can do a lot of good things. And there's a lot of different strategies to do that on a small local scale that are just like very powerful. Um, and so, you know, we've seen a lot of success with that in Northern Manhattan parks, but that gets complicated and challenged a lot by climate change. And so, um, for all of us, you know, just so there's a kind of a shared sense of some of the basics, you know, when the air temperature increases, it holds more water, and that is driving a lot more intense rainfall in New York City. So we have a lot more intense rainfall and flooding. Um, but that hot air also pulls water out of the soil more quickly. So we're experiencing more drought, more dry soils, as well as more flooding. So we're experiencing more extremes. So that problem we already had with hasty water in New York City is exacerbated by all these extremes, right? And it affects the whole ecosystem of the city. It changes the vegetation, it changes the soils, it changes our estuary. When all of that water, when it overflows our storm sewer system, it leads to sewage discharges in the estuary. And so the whole system of New York City is stressed by climate change, particularly the increasing precipitation, but also the periods of drought. You know, this time last year, we were experiencing really serious drought and starting to see wildfires in our urban forests that we haven't seen in a long time. And so, you know, as DK points out, though, you know, it's serious and challenging issues, but the really wonderful thing about working on it is like we can make quite significant contributions as gardeners in small but very meaningful ways, or in large and meaningful ways through collaborations. And so as we work to adapt to this kind of accelerated hydrological system with more extremes, we can create a lot of beauty and play with a lot of plants and play with managing water. And actually, it's one of the most some of the most fun I have in my job is when we are kind of like attempting to create wetlands and create little rain gardens and rebuild the soils. And so there's a lot of really practical approaches. My expertise is like much more in native plant gardening and ecosystem restoration rather than vegetable growing. But I also have some background in urban soils and thinking about what we can do with urban soils to contribute to this kind of slow water movement that I'd like to see more of us embrace. And so those are some of the things I'm happy to speak to as we go. And just like final words on that. Topic of the kind of seriousness and the weight of what we're talking about, um, it's really important when we're thinking about water and climate to keep in mind the different kind of timescales that climate change impacts New York City. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently because we have very long-term impacts with water where we have sea level rise that potentially will be like changing the city profoundly as we see very high levels of sea level rise and have to really adapt where we're living and how we're living. But that's a very slow process. And so we can take our time, like getting to know the water better and working with the water better. And I think it's important to hold like urgency and seriousness when we think about the energy transition and stopping to burn fossil fuels and really addressing the climate crisis, like full speed and with all the energy we can. But when it comes to gardening, I think we can bring like a very different energy where we think about it as a long-term relationship with a changing environment. And so hopefully it can be a source of respite for us as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm excited to continue the conversation once we get to that portion. So next up, we have our wonderful partners, Seaweed City, to talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing in our estuary. So I'm gonna quickly share my screen. Alrighty. How's that looking for everybody? Perfect. All right. And without further ado, Seaweed City, please take it away.
Okay. I'm gonna speak first. My name is Sean. Luke and I we founded Seaweed City. We've been basically farming seaweed, especially primarily sugar kelp in New York City for almost 5 years. Our first location was in Newtown Creek, which is extremely polluted, and that is one of the more exciting locations for us because of the condition of the water there. And the thing with seaweeds is that they're very good at taking in nutrients that end up in our waterways, from what Jason was talking about. So when we have heavy rainfall, we have our sewer systems are built so that they can't handle, they just run into each other. So we have runoff from our sewers that end up in our waterways. So that dumps a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in our waters, and this can lead to what are essentially dead zones. So when we plant seaweed, first of all, there's not enough of these natural seaweeds out in our waterways, just because we've dredged so much of our water for industrial purposes in the last 150, 60 years. So there isn't that intertidal zone, the relationship between land and water that, promotes a lot of marine life. So I'm rambling a bit, but it's, so this is agriculture for restoration is how we see it. But we also, the scale can be farming where it can be acres and acres, or it could be small, like a garden. And it's taking in these excess nutrients from the water, leaving it healthier and creating like places for marine life to live and have food. It can work to alleviate some wave action, just like oyster reefs do. Nigel, you can start going through the slides, please. Luke, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're just gonna show some pictures because the idea of seaweed farming is pretty foreign to most people. So these are some pictures of our installation at Newtown Creek. We can go to the next slide. It's fairly small. This is our installation from a few years ago, but as you can see, it's right in industrial Brooklyn, and that's part of the idea. Next slide.
And what you're seeing actually under those dark lines are blades of kelp that are hanging 3 feet below the water. So you just like see, I mean, part of what we try to do is to say that there's life underneath, to show that there's life underneath the water that we don't see, but there's just, that's one of the things that's being affected is like the oceans, and that makes up so much of Earth. So climate change is having just like a horrible effect on our oceans.
You can go to the next slide. So last year we started a new site at Governor's Island, and that's been very different for us. The water there is much less polluted, and we have the opportunity to grow much more kelp. So this is a picture of us out on our boat, right off the shoreline of Governor's Island. And we've got a number of students with us testing the water and testing the kelp as it grows. You can go to the next slide.
There's a question about how deep the water is. In Newtown Creek, it's about 12 feet, 12 to 15. In Governor's Island, it's deeper, I think like 20 feet.
Yeah, so everything we do is from boats. It is possible to grow kelp in shallower waters. So you could just wade out to it and tend it that way.
So as you can see, I think that was previous photograph was from our second year in Newtown Creek. It's very robust. So we can have like 100 foot of kelp just from the nutrients in the creek and sunlight. So one thing about this aquatic, it's not a plant technically, but this aquatic, like gardening, this is we don't need to add fertilizer. It's just nutrients and sunlight.
You can go to the next slide. Part of what we do is to try to get the public out to our kelp gardens. Feel like it's a very magical experience to reach into the water and be able to pull up this line of seaweed and see like how robust it is and see all the life that's growing among it. We run these things called kelp cruises in the spring. So if you'd like to sign up and you can find out about it, maybe you can come out with us next year. You can go to the next slide. You want to talk about the nursery?
Sure. So we've had quite a bit of interest in having seaweed gardens around the city. We're a very small organization, still growing, but with the sites in Newtown Creek and Governor's Island, we've needed support with growing the juvenile seaweeds. So what you're looking at is a nursery that we have on Governor's Island, and it's a little hard to describe, but the what I'm holding up is a spool, and the brown the brown fuzzy areas are basically tiny blades of the sugar kelp that grew to about 5 feet 5 feet tall in Governor's Island and about 3 feet long in Newtown Creek. So this is from a year ago, and it was our first year with the hatchery slash nursery. We're actually starting this up this Friday, so we'll have open hours if you want to come look at like baby seaweed blades.
You can go to the next slide. Yeah, what is there to say about this? We really think it's beautiful. That's part of why we do it. It's just like people love to touch it, and one activity you can do is you can make an herbarium, which you can also do with land plants. You press them so you can look at them later. That's what we're doing on the left. You can go to the next slide.
So we harvest the seaweed we grow, although in Newtown Creek, I think we're looking at more just restorative purposes, just because in our last harvest, we found that it was like teeming with marine life, like arthropods, crabs, fish that someone from the Hudson River Trust said that they don't really see in the Hudson. So it's like a great area, or great, like, the blades are a great section to study for the biodiversity in places like Newtown Creek or all these different bodies of water that we have in New York City, like little creeks and like, bays. But in Governor's Island, we harvested, and because we work under sort of this, regenerative and restorative practice, it's technically called bioextraction because it's taking in these excess nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus from the water. And what we do is dry it or ferment it. So I think the next slide shows dried kelp. Oh, that's sorry, that's the biodiversity one. But next one. And so we get our kelp tested, and what you're looking at is the kelp from Governor's Island. This is dried and chopped up, and we have people participate in making this. It's soil amendment. So, Luke, you wanna-
Yeah, sure. I mean, Nisha and I actually met many years ago in a garden.
In Earth
we
Matter.
at Earth Matter and Governor's Island. And so we have this connection to gardening as on land as well as gardening in the water. So one of the greatest things you can do with kelp that you harvest is to put it back into the soil. It has really amazing micronutrients, and I can testify that it works really well. I have a small bucket garden, and it's helped all the plants that I've put it on, and it's a really great alternative to chemical fertilizers. You can go to the next slide. This is an alternative method of making kelp soil amendment. It's fermentation. So we mix the fresh kelp into water and a little bit of molasses and a microbial inoculant, and we let it sit for 3 months. What comes out the other end is what they call liquid kelp. And that's in that form, you can use it as a soil drench or as a foliar spray. Seaweed juice, yeah, exactly.
We're thinking, people still like those lawns, and as much as we'd like to replace lawns with, maybe some native species or wildflower gardens, at least we can get rid of some of those foliar sprays some of those chemical sprays on lawns and replace it with more traditional things like seaweed in soil.
Yeah.
It goes back.
This is something we should talk about. It's like this is not new stuff. People have been doing this for a long time, and not only in one part of the world. People do it in Asia, in Europe, in North America. It's something that people have done for a long time to take seaweed from the ocean and put it into the soil. You can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, so thank you. Please chime in. Do we have questions right away, or we should wrap up? Oh yeah.
We do have some questions, actually. Thank you so much for making space for that. So we had a question about what other water bodies, particularly in New York City, or what other waterways would be good to grow kelp. Someone mentioned in the chat that Jamaica Bay could be a possibility. We also mentioned that you've visited our location at NYRP up in Northern Manhattan. So share with us what other spaces would be prime and healthy for something like this.
There's a lot of different places.
Yeah,
and we've got some places in mind that we're trying to develop.
I think for us as an organization, it's important to have a community aspect to it. So while we're very good at like the being on the water and the installation of the kelp, but we're not. We like an organization like Newtown Creek Alliance to work with us on the programming and get folks involved from the community in that location, so it's kind of weird to show up somewhere and drop some lines of kelp and then I don't know.
Yeah.
So it depends on like who we can work with and what they need from it. Like, one of the things that's happening on Governor's Island is that we're meeting a lot of people who are interested in biomass for alternative biomass to replace fossil fuel based materials like plastic, right? So seaweed to replace plastic is something that we're very like excited to work with like Parsons School. So it's just so that has become more like materials-based research. Folks are coming to us at Governor's Island.
Everyone, we love that you are blowing up the chat with your questions. We're going to give Sean and Luke a moment to finish their actual presentation, and we will be sure to go ahead and supplement with questions, and we will get to as many questions as much as we can during our allotted time. But do not worry. Sean and Luke and Jason Smith are going to share how to get in touch with them. We at Green Thumb and NYRP are going to say how to get in touch with us, because we understand that the conversation never stops here and it will keep growing. Sean and Luke, if you will continue, and then we'll jump back in with more questions. Thank you.
That was the end of our slides.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you both for that wonderful presentation. And thank you, Jason, for the overview about water here in New York City, and how our water systems currently work and are impacted by climate. I kind of wanted to start the conversation though, just kind of like with some foundational questions. The first question I'd like to ask you all is, can we first define what an estuary and an intertidal zone is for folks that may not know?
Jason, do you want to take estuary?
Sure, I think so. Someone can probably go on Google and correct me, but I think, you know, we refer to the estuary as all the waters in our area that are, I think they're brackish and they're tidal. And so it includes like the Hudson estuary includes the Harlem and Newtown Creek and Jamaica Bay. And I think by definition, it's just a tidal and brackish area, which tends to be very biodiverse, and often also very densely populated.
Yeah, in the intertidal zone, I'll give that one a shot. It's the zone between high tide and low tide. It's a zone that's often neglected in urban areas because we like to build a wall right there. But there's so much life that wants to exist in that zone. So that's something that we at Seaweed City really want to promote, is that the seaweed work we do is basically, it's just a part of that whole continuum. So it's what happens in the water that's next to what happens in the intertidal zone, which is next to what happens on the land, and it's all connected and related to each other. And if you can you need to be aware of all parts of it, so you can support the whole ecosystem.
And just I think it was a nice question, Nija, because as a New Yorker, I think, you know, I did not think at all about the intertidal zone and living on an estuary growing up. And so we're very cut off from those kind of foundational physical aspects of our reality. And climate change is reminding us of that, right? And so it's really, I think it's really important for New Yorkers to recognize the value of the intertidal zone, because it's this area that is both land and water, right? And it's underwater twice a day at high tides, and it's incredibly productive, incredibly important to life in the city, and it's moving, right? Because we're experiencing sea level rise. And so where the intertidal zone is changing. And so when we look at flood maps of the city, that is the intertidal zone moving into the built environment. And so whether we decide to try to build big walls or allow that water to come and go is one of those decisions are being made in New York City now in a lot of ways, oftentimes driven by like federal level planning. And there's a lot of walls being built, which don't support life and don't support the kind of work that Seaweed City is doing or NYRP is doing in the intertidal zone.
That's a wonderful segue for my next question, Jason. Thank you so much. So, you know, you mentioned talking about things like rain gardens. Obviously, we're talking about seaweed gardens, and I'd like to think of those things as nature-based solutions. So, you know, the question is like, why are nature-based solutions better at addressing this interconnection between land and water and that intertidal zone versus things like building walls to keep water from advancing? Let me know if I need to ask that again.
We might just be too polite if you want to like suggest one of us to answer,
Oh,
but
okay. Yeah.
I'm always ready.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, I'll pass it to you first, Jason, and then Luke and Sean.
I mean, part of why I love talking to Luke and Sean this evening is because the seaweed is such a good example of with nature-based solutions. It's not the best word, but people talk about like co-benefits, right? So you're oftentimes, if you're thinking about an engineered solution, you're building for one thing. When you're doing nature-based solutions, I increasingly just think about life-giving solutions, right? Because they're like, and they're, to me, that's a fuller way of thinking about it than the co-benefits, right? But if you're growing seaweed, they already showed us, right? We're creating a little home for all kinds of wildlife that is missing that kind of structure in the water. It's removing nitrogen and phosphorus, which we are dumping in the water with our sewage. And really excitingly, which we didn't even touch on, right? It's potentially at least experimenting with some ways that might reduce ocean acidification, which is this like huge global, we were talking about kind of climate, not to get ahead of ourselves and think about climate grief, but it's like one of the biggest, scariest things going on right now. And the fact that, again, you can do this kind of life-giving activity that's actually potentially helping to reduce ocean acidification is just amazing. And that's a process where we have too much carbon dioxide in the air. That's the root of this whole problem. And growing seaweed and removing it, you're actually taking carbon out of the water. And that's what's driving the ocean acidification. It's basically becoming like seltzer, where seltzer gets very tangy because of all the carbon dioxide in there. That's what we're doing to the ocean. And so um, it's just it has so many cool co-benefits. And basically, like, I'll stop talking in a minute, but like the way I think about what we're doing is we're when we have these life-giving systems, they maintain a kind of homeostasis of an ecosystem, right? They have these negative feedbacks, right? If we have a wetland that is working, it's pulling carbon dioxide out of the air and burying it in the sediments. It's creating habitat. It's slowing water down to reduce flooding. And it's kind of maintaining a balance. When the wetlands start to fail, it actually goes the other way, and we start to emit carbon, and we start to see more flooding, and we start to see erosion, and that pollutes our waters, and we start to see an unraveling of the ecosystem. And so at its best, nature-based solutions are these amazing win-wins, which we don't feel like we have a lot of win-wins. But you can, when you start to build something that is a living, working system, it's doing all kinds of good things for you. And oftentimes, right, it's not like gonna solve every problem. Oftentimes we might need walls on our waterfront to protect critical infrastructure. But we really underinvest in nature-based solutions because they're so powerful and so have all these co-benefits. So sorry, I'll leave it at that.
I do think we have like, I think sort of an attachment to very concrete things, like literally concrete, like building to us is, yeah, like literally just walls, and less so with like things that move and people have to adjust to it. Like nature-based solutions, you know, those are part of like traditional practices. Like people moved with like the way that the land moved, and we, it still happens in places like Bangladesh, right? Like, except we come in and we try to like manage and control nature, control what's happening, and maybe we just haven't figured. I think the nature-based solutions is not new, but accepting it feel like right now it feels like, it's like a new concept, and people are hesitant to it. Someone, like the Army Corps of Engineers based their designs for protecting the city from like studies from data from like 30 years ago. And since in 30 years, a lot of things have happened too. And they adjust because of like pushback. I think there needs to be like a shift from thinking about like controlling our environment in such a way that we have and like progress as like, you know, Miracle Grow on your on your like this crazy fertilizer that makes things grow like, you know, like is that what is that the solution, is to like make things grow faster or bigger? So I think just needs to be like an adjustment from on not the person, not necessarily the personal level, like education, but it's like systemic level.
Thank you for those were wonderful answers and insightful. I think I agree. I think we also just kind of need to slow down for a second. In my personal opinion, I think we need to slow down and take and look back a little bit at what used to be and what used to work. My next question is for Luke and Sean, talking a little bit more about seaweed gardening or farming. How accessible is seaweed farming for folks here in New York City? And what is the potential for scaling it across the city and making it even more accessible if it isn't already?
That's a great question. It's something we think about all the time. Honestly, it's not very accessible, and that's part of why we're doing this, is to make it more accessible. Access to the water to the population of New York City is not good. It's very hard to get close to the water. There's some places where you can, but even those are very controlled and they're not accessible to most people. If you want to do something in the water, it's almost impossible. You can kayak, you can canoe, you can go on a ferry, but we would like it to be possible for somebody who wants to have a seaweed garden as part of a community to do that. And that's actually something we'd like to get your feedback on, because that's one of our missions, is to like establish these community-based seaweed gardens throughout the 5 boroughs, and like have them be self-sustaining and not rely, for instance, on an organization like Seaweed City to like maintain them, but they would be locally maintained for the local benefit of that community. So it's a question of finding appropriate sites that are close to strong community hubs, that can manage like a little bit of a difficult thing, which is getting in the water. So it's about infrastructure. So in some cases you need a place to dock a boat. So that's not common actually in New York City. It's something we'd like to promote, is like more boat access. Also, there's a lot of sites where you can just put on a pair of waders and walk into the water, and those sites are really exciting because it opens up the accessibility of seaweed gardening to a lot more people. So that's the kind of site we're on the lookout for, and hopefully it's early stages, but we're looking at a new site that, in addition to the site at Sherman Creek, we have a couple of other sites we're looking at where wading is a possibility. So we're super excited about that.
I have to remind people that water, like land underwater, is the commons. Except for 2 places in New York City, the water belongs to the people, which like we still have to, but you know, we still have to get permission from like the adjacent landlord.
Right.
So this is kind of like this. It's sort of like a conflict, right? Like to have something be the commons, and yet we had people on land, and as they're building, they like basically ruined the waterway too, or that like they just dumped things in the water, or they just didn't they didn't take note of the water as also being something that they should steward, right? So this like water access to me is very interesting, just because like the way that ownership ends up working in something that belongs to no one and everyone and it's shared by everyone.
Thank you so much. That is something that I didn't even consider. Is thinking about the ownership of the water and who actually has the right to use it and when and why and how. And that does kind of lend nicely to the next question that I have. Jason, you kind of mentioned earlier in the conversation that as a New Yorker, you never really thought about the intertidal zone. You never really thought about the estuary and like being surrounded by that. And I feel I've had the same experience as a New Yorker growing up here where, you know, my mom kind of just like told me the water was nasty, don't go near it. That was really what I learned about living near the East River, which is where I grew up early in my youth. So in terms of gaps in public education and around water issues and around and solutions, like, you know, what are they and how can our garden community help to fill in those gaps so that way folks know, you know exactly what level of access they have, know where to go, who to speak to get access to water, and to participate in solutions.
I mean, I think we touched on some of the foundational barriers to accessing the water, which is a big one. But I think you know, we work with a lot. We do environmental education primarily with partners in the parks in northern Manhattan, and I would say there's just not enough of it at all, right? And you know, there's a great organization called NYCH2O that has developed a curriculum about New York City's water system and how it works. And it's just like the great thing, it's a great learning tool because it's very much you know, as you can tell by the sprawling nature of this conversation, like water crosses all boundaries. And so to learn about New York City's water system, you learn about the watershed in the Catskills and you learn about the old aqueducts that came over Highbridge into Highbridge Park in northern Manhattan, and you learn about the sewer system and learn about water quality and how it's changing. And so there's so much to learn, and I think garden education is a great way. You know, one of my passions is soil science and just learning the basics about how soil holds water, and how plants use that is very wonderful hands-on opportunity. So, you know, I guess there is a lot of foundational need to invest in that kind of education around the city. I'm not sure if that's touching on your question.
I think so. Luke and Sean, do you have anything to add to, you know, gaps in public education where you may see them and how gardeners can help address some of those if possible?
I mean, creating healthy soil is something that gardeners are very good at. And that's something that we need to, as Jason mentioned, to slow the water down. And the more of that we have, the less runoff we'll have in our harbor and in our estuary. So this is a stewardship that gardeners should take on and do take on. But it's something that I'm sure you're all aware of, but thank you for doing that.
I hear that Jude has had their hand raised for a while, so sorry if I missed it. I can't see the hands. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
No, actually was I want to like basically double back on what Sean said was about the engineers the engineers and like how we make the solutions, but it's geared towards public safety. So even if it's something for nature in nature, it's not really for it's for public safety overall. And when these things like whatever they are, retaining walls, whatever, when they are defective, I mean, it takes years, even when they know it's like a critical problem, unless it's facing public, like public has access to it, it'll deteriorate to they get embarrassed about it. Like, oh, something fell, and it's like I hear it in the news. But it may be causing destruction in the environment, but when I go through these reports, it's like this was done 10 years ago. Like, what number? And these inspections are like every year or biannually. So it takes a long time for engineering solutions to be corrected. And it's a lot of money. I'm talking about millions of dollars of cotton. So to have nature-based solutions is the right way to go.
Yeah, I take your point really well. And I think I love your point that the people need to be drawn to a place, right? Like the idea of creating this zone of engineering where there's no nature and there's no people, that's actually going to fail even at its core, if like as working as engineering, because people are not going to want to go near it. And it's going to break down because it won't have any attention on it. If we can build solutions that incorporate like human communities and natural systems, that's the kind of system that's self-sustaining, and will continue to work years and years in the future.
Yeah, it's also, I can't emphasize how important it is to conserve the wetlands that we have, the marshes that we have, because, or, elsewhere, like the mangroves, it's just because the effort it takes to return to where it was, it's just so much. And, something like, I don't even know the number, but like the marshes capture so much of carbon. I think even like us restoring that back isn't as effective as like the marsh that's like, I don't know. It's like conserving what we still have left is just so important.
And also like our solutions that we implement, engineering wise, is just like directed at one thing, as opposed to like nature's gonna be like having multiple solutions that we don't, and we like didn't even know this was happening. You see like a whole bunch of wildlife coming back, or even deeper in soil, and like so much thing that might bounce back or new that might be created, and we didn't have an intention of that in by design, by implementing these natural solutions, as opposed to when we put engineering is supposed for one general thing to hold something back, to keep things at bay or whatever. And it's short-sighted because it doesn't do anything, it doesn't contribute to the environment at all.
Thank you so much, Jude, for your thoughts and contributing to the conversation. We appreciate it. I know that there's lots of questions going on in the chat, so I'm only going to ask about one or two more, and then I'm going to open it up to ask some of the questions that have been happening, because I don't want to miss out on anything that's in there. So I guess this is like a multi-tier question, and it's to both Jason and Luke and Sean at Seaweed City. Beyond conservation, what is the most impactful role that gardeners and gardens can play? And what are the tangible things that they can do? You spoke about building healthy soils, but are there other things that gardeners can be doing to contribute, whether it's to education, whether it's to actually, participating in a practice that's healthy, or, just kind of going out and trying to fight for policy change? Just what are your thoughts on how gardeners can have an impact on the slow water movement?
I guess I'll go. I think it's really important to know what you're using in your garden. I'm pretty sure most of you are very knowledgeable about this, but it's, like we've just used chemical fertilizer, and the runoffs in our even in our urban waterways are not just from combined sewer overflows. It's also from like runoffs from land, and oftentimes that includes chemical fertilizers.
Um, I'll jump in, but feel free to cut me off or add anything. But I would say like probably I think one of New York City's biggest environmental impacts is the nitrogen and nutrients we bring to the estuary, mostly through sewage, but also through fertilizer runoff. And so gardeners can really directly impact that, again, by slowing the water down, right? And that could be as small as putting a pot on a fire escape, right? That pot is collecting rainwater. And that's a certain amount of rainwater that is not going into the sewer system, and that is reducing the amount of sewage that we're discharging in the estuary. And when we discharge sewage in the estuary, we've been talking about nutrients and removing nutrients, but it's a good to understand, and it speaks to that educational gap, right? We've been at NYRP, the parks team has increasingly been taking kids out to test the dissolved oxygen content of the waterways, because that's what happens when we release sewage into the waterways. We increase nutrients and we have harmful algal blooms, and they decompose and they remove oxygen from the waters, and the fish are unhappy. And if it gets bad enough, the fish can't survive and marine life suffers. And in the Gulf of Mexico, we have an area people call the Great Dead Zone in the ocean. And our estuary is not like that. Our estuary is filled with life, but it is severely impacted by nutrients. And so gardeners are daily working to reduce that. And this isn't one of those examples of, again, of those co-benefits, right? When we create healthy soil through good practices such as composting, mulching, doing no or low till practices to build soil structure, that soil has a complex pore structure that holds an amazing amount of water. That's a great place to grow veggies and plants, but you're also holding a terrific amount of water, which again is released very slowly and is not contributing to pollution in the waterways. And so it's not exactly like different than what we talked about, but just to dive in more deeply like that, soil management is I think the most important thing. And you know, I think thinking about how we use water, we didn't touch on through irrigation. NYRP's urban ag team does irrigation workshops, and I think if we do smart irrigation where we minimize the water we're using, again, then we have less runoff. And again, we're that water, one of the things about ecology is everything goes somewhere, right? Whether, and so you know, the less water we're using, the healthier it is for the city. Um, and you know, I do think like so land-based gardeners can do a ton for the health of the estuary. The solutions you could do in the estuary are a little more complicated, like we talked about, but I think technically they're not that hard. We've oyster gardens are are very doable in addition to kelp gardens and floating wetlands, and a lot of these things can be done on a neighborhood community scale. And it helps build a culture, acclimate regulators and property owners to getting used to people doing this stuff. And it's really, really exciting and has really profound impacts. And then the last thing I would say is if anyone's interested in what like kind of informally designed rain gardens look like, the parks team in Northern Manhattan and Highbridge have been building a lot of water retention features that allow us to do some really fun wetland creation on land that does creates great ecological gardens, but also manages flooding. And last thing, if anyone, anything we can do to remove pavement is even better. Like if you can manage your soil well, where you or street tree care, right? Anything you can do to make the surface of our city more permeable is the way to go.
Awesome. And I do have to say, last season I did volunteer with Jason and team to build rain gardens up at Highbridge, and it was a really good time. So if you're interested, keep a lookout on our website, our social media to see when more work like that is being done up in Highbridge. Thank you all so much for this lovely conversation. Let's keep it going with questions from our audience in the chat. Mel, DK, I don't know if you've been keeping track of questions that haven't been addressed in the chat, because I sure haven't. So if you don't mind helping me out, that'd be awesome.
No problem. First question is for both Jason and Sean and Luke. Can you all tell us, how do you track and measure restoration?
I'll take that.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Sean. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's this is something we think about a lot, but don't have a really great answer to. We have like anecdotal. Let's see. We would love to be able to track biodiversity. That's one of the big benefits that we would like to support by growing seaweed. And so far, we've just done that by taking pictures of it and logging what we find. But we'd like to be able to consider that in a little bit more of a analytical way. So that's something we're working on. And then
There's nitrogen measurement per like foot of kelp grown or the biomass collected. So the nitrogen bioextraction is becoming it is quite important, including in like the Chesapeake, because like as Jason emphasized, there's just so much nutrients running into our coastal areas, coastal waterways. So one metric that we measure restoration through is the nitrogen sequestration from water.
Jason?
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's a very tricky question, partially because we were talking about all this co-benefits, right? And we were also talking about the value of small scale things in a overwhelming system. And so you can't always capture all of that. But we've tried a lot of different things. And I would say like one interesting thing I've found is generally like our supporters and people we work with are much more find narratives and being in the space and seeing the results like really what is powerful. But we spend a lot of time, we always measure our effort, and a lot of organizations measure, what do you do? How much time do you spend doing a thing, removing garbage? But that doesn't get at your success. And so with natural restoration, we've invested a great deal of time and effort in measuring the impacts of a project called the Sherman Creek Living Shoreline, where we built an intertidal oyster reef in the estuary. And that was used to expand diminishing wetlands. And so we tracked a lot of metrics, and there's a whole framework that's emerging in the city that's kind of experimental for how you measure nature-based features on the shoreline. And it's an adaptation of an old way to measure the impact of wetlands. So we measured the elevation changes. Turned out to be really hard, and we're still doing it. We measured the establishment of vegetation. That tends to be the first thing people measure. Are my trees alive, and how big are they? Are my grasses alive, and how tall and dense are they? And that's the easiest thing to do, but that's a big thing because that's the foundation of your food web and everything. And then we were really excited with the Living Shoreline to work partner with some academics at CUNY and SUNY, Chester Zarnock and some collaborators, Mary Aldred, and they actually they did a full ecosystem services analysis of the Sherman Creek Living Shoreline, and they measured how much carbon are we burying, right? So how much air pollution are we removing? How much nitrogen are we removing from the water? And they took soil cores back to their lab and ran Harlem River water through those cores and measured the actual physical impact of this pretty small project. But it was kind of a special project, so we were able to get these amazing researchers to partner with us for a few years, measuring the impact. And then they actually put like a dollar value on it. So we can say the Sherman Creek Living Shoreline is removing, $10 of carbon pollution a minute, or $50 of nitrogen pollution a week. And so it was a really extensive exercise. And I would say it appealed to a very small number of people, like just the story that we created a living, accessible place that was beautiful and like good was what people cared about. And I would just say one small like agreement with the Seaweed City team is because we love supporting life-giving environments, we always want to know like how is this impacting biodiversity? And it's really hard because if you want to do it in a rigorous way, you need a lot of people who know how to identify a lot of bugs and a lot of critters, and they're just most scientists don't do that anymore. And so it's a really great opportunity, like gardeners are teaching themselves how to identify bugs. Like now when I go to a horticulture conference, half of it is about bugs instead of plants. And so I think of this as this, if for folks interested in documenting success through monitoring biodiversity, I think it's becoming more grassroots, and there are some apps like iNaturalist that facilitate that. And so I think biodiversity monitoring is a real exciting way forward, and we're hoping to do more of that in Sherman Creek on the shoreline next year.
We have one question very specifically for Sean and Luke, followed by a question very specifically for Jason Smith. Sean and Luke, how did you get into aquaculture?
Well, I always like to say that Sean had a dream to become an oyster farmer, and then she can tell it. It was many years ago. Sean is an artist, and it's like an aesthetic experience for her.
Oh no, it's a life experience. When you just like, I really love the water, and I love that I'm in a city surrounded by water, but I would have to bike an hour and 20 minutes to go open water swimming. So it's very like, it's like, wow, I'm surrounded by water, but I can either not touch it or I touch it, but like, it doesn't matter. Anyways, I was like oyster farming. And then I was researching, and then the seaweed farming, the kelp farming came along. And these things go together so really well. And I was interested in it for aquaculture for food. So in Long Island, you do have sea farms with oysters and kelp now that are edible. So it's just that we don't have the culture of eating seaweeds in the United States, which is unfortunate. Anyways, these things came together, and it was like, it's been a 12-year journey. And I ended up, and Luke joined me, working for an oyster farmer in Long Island, who was trialing seaweed farming in his oyster farm. So yeah, so something that's for food, I just learned that it also has these benefits to the environment, right? They don't need anything except for what's in the water, both shellfish and seaweeds, and you don't need to like fertilize it. I don't like a lot of the plastic that goes into aquaculture, but people are working on that. Yeah, so we've worked around Newtown Creek for most of our time in New York, so for like almost 20 years now. And the creek has always been this body of water that we biked over and worked around, but never really like considered as a place as nature. So yeah, we just kind of was like, let's try seaweeds here since there are so much nutrients.
Yeah, I
that's
want to shout out the Cornell Cooperative Extension. They were a big part in us learning how to do aquaculture in general. So I know that they're great for all kinds of like agriculture and gardening things. So I'm sure you're all aware of it, but they're great.
Shout out to Cornell Extension and all the great work that they do. Thank you so much for that. Jason Smith, can you please unmute? And can you please help us to make further correlations between the connections of wetlands to gardens? It's been my experience that oftentimes community members, when we think of gardens, we just don't think of wetlands, and we certainly don't think about those connections. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, just to start with acknowledging a big difference, which is like anything in the intertidal zone is going to have salty water, and that is going to change. Like in New York's history, though, the intertidal zone was an important place of sustenance for the Lenape, whether it's fishing, oyster harvesting, and then even early in for much of New York's history, harvesting wetland grasses was called like salt hay, and it was not, it was all a very productive landscape. And then, when we move out of the tidal zone, our wetlands are freshwater. And though, those few and far between. Are they like natural spaces? And I think, one really effective use to think about them and integrating it into a garden space is like if your garden is in a flood prone area or an area next to a lot of pavement, there's often a need for something to manage floodwater either coming off of a neighboring building or a garden shed. And so there's a lot of capacity for building rain gardens, which are basically like homemade upland wetlands. And so I think that's one of the obvious ways to think about them functioning like within a community garden space. I'm not sure if that spoke to the question.
It absolutely speaks to the question. Thank you. A question back to Seaweed City. We're getting a lot of traction in the chat, making comparisons of kelp to compost. Can you clarify for us and expand? Is kelp an alternative, an amendment, or replacement for compost?
I can talk about that a little bit. I say use both. Don't give up your compost for sure. It's to me, the biggest benefit of adding the kelp is micronutrients. It's not going to give you large quantities of your nitrogen or phosphorus. And you're still going to want to get that from your compost. So I think ideally you're using both, and you don't have to, I mean, if you don't have access to kelp, it's fine. There's other ways to garden, but it's a really cool and I think good addition to a comprehensive soil health strategy. I don't know, were there any specific questions about it, like how to use it or
I would say that we're pretty excited in the chat about the notion that the kelp is fruitful and helping, I'll use a word for myself, regenerating or has regenerative, properties for the soil.
Yeah.
So, the soil is life.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's where it is. So to know that there are alternatives that we can return to, because Sean, you said so well and so eloquently, this isn't new. We've strayed away from it. So for us, for many of us, it is a return. So it would be interesting for us to know, very specifically, how can we use kelp for soil?
Yeah, that's great. And regenerative, I think, is a good word for it, because I think what's happening is that the kelp is feeding the microbiome of the soil. So it's not feeding your plants exactly, it's feeding the soil. And that soil is, when you have a healthy soil, the plants benefit from that. It's bringing all these micronutrients and polysaccharides and things like that that are feeding like fungus and microorganisms and like all the biology that's there. So that's I'm not a biologist, but that's my understanding what the benefit is.
Did you also mention, and correct me if I'm wrong, in one of our conversations, that the kelp could be useful for retaining moisture in the soil as well?
That's just my experience.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I did like a sort of not rigorous experiment in my bucket garden. So I put some kelp in some of my buckets and I didn't in some of my other buckets that I was growing basil in. And I made it so I didn't need to water them very often. So the buckets I didn't have the kelp in, I had to basically water every single day, or else they dry out in the sun. But the ones that had the kelp retained water for about a week before they had to be watered again. So it's in my experience, a big difference.
I mean, it makes sense from like first principles that what you're saying that kelp, if it supports soil biology, it's adding organic matter, which helps with moisture retention, but then it's also supporting soil biology, which is really crucial for developing soil structure, which is how soil holds water. Maybe in other ways as well, but like most of our soils that we're gardening in are don't have much structure because they're often in raised beds or buckets or in places that have experienced severe compaction. And so it takes like the activity of soil biology to create pores and structure in the soil and exudates to hold clumps together. And that process, it sounds like maybe the kelp is particularly good at fostering, which would be exciting.
Yeah, one other pathway to what you're talking about is um, uh, the kelp can absorb about like 10 times its weight when it's dry in water. So if you put dry kelp into the soil and it rains, it's going to, all of that dry kelp that's in the soil is just going to soak up a lot of water until it decomposes. But it'll have that effect over about a month, probably, or maybe a little less.
We know here in this room that water matters, and we're talking about the amazing benefits of kelp in the water and soil. I was so honored and I was so excited to learn when our NYRP team came to visit with you, Sean and Luke, that amongst the laundry list of benefits of kelp, what stuck out to me of so many things was that the kelp is also a food source for crabs and fish and microorganisms. Why aren't we talking about kelp more? Why aren't we talking about this across the country? And what can we do to not only be talking about it, but for everyone in this room, and I'll remind everyone in this room, the conversation never stops here. As stewards of the land, it is our responsibility to keep these conversations going and growing. Jason, Sean, and Luke, how do we, as farmers in an urban community, how do we get involved to keep this growing? How do we learn more?
Let me say something very quickly. Um, I think it's have an open mind about the ecosystems that you want to be aware of. You know, don't have a narrow focus on one little thing. And for us, it's like don't have a narrow focus on kelp, say, you know, have a like think broadly about the ecosystem. And we do focus on growing seaweed, but we try to think of it in a very, very broad context. And I think the reason, just to answer your question, the reason more people aren't talking about seaweed growing as like a gardening practice is because it's under the water and it's hard to see. And so like that's all about broadening your perspective, like thinking about more parts of like the complete ecosystem that you live in.
Yeah, your question, DK, made me think a little bit about like some of the pioneering community gardeners. You know, it's like whatever mindset you have that's going to make you look at an abandoned lot and decide to start a farm there is maybe similar to looking at Newtown Creek and being like, I should be growing seaweed in there. Um, and you know how to do more of that. You know, there's obviously a huge network of people doing it to join, like join an NYRP garden or check out Seaweed City. But I think we could also we can do more just by looking at your street tree pits again, looking at all the vacant space around where you are. One of my favorite places to think about gardening in New York is just all the places along the highways and what we haven't how all these spaces that we don't care for that we're surrounded by. And then I think obviously like engaging in policy is a really big deal longer term and thinking about you know liberating ourselves from so many cars and pavements so we have more room to grow things and a healthier environment in general to grow them in. Um, but yeah, for me, it's just always finding the people that you love to do the work with, whether it's a organization or your neighbors.
Thank you so much for that. We're at the 7:23 mark. I just put in the chat. I would love for everyone, if you have an organization doing this so important environmental work, please feel free to shout it out at the chat. At NYRP, and I'm going to say at Green Thumb as well, we all believe that nature is a fundamental right. We all believe that we grow together. And I can't stress enough, please reach out to us at NYRP. Please reach out to Green Thumb. Please reach out to Sean and Luke. Y'all run, swim, don't walk to visit Seaweed City. I would very much like to give the floor to our attendees. I want to make sure that we answered all of the questions. Please feel free to unmute at this time if you have a burning question on your mind that you would like to introduce into the room. We are all facilitators in the space. Those who join us virtually at NYRP already know this. For those who are new to us, we are all facilitators. We all have something to learn from each other. And Naja has a question. Can we eat seaweed? And then after Naja, Mary, please unmute after Naja. Thank you.
Not the seaweed around New York City, but Long Island, there are areas of Long Island you can't either, but you just, there, you know, water has different qualities. So you just
Maybe-
have to know the quality of the water.
Just wait a few years until the water in New York City is nice and clean, and then you can eat the New York City seaweed.
Shout out to Bronx River Alliance and all the great work that they are doing to help achieve that dream of cleaner water for New Yorkers. Mary, please go.
I was just wondering if so this is like a little bit off topic, but still on water. If you guys knew any anyone working in like the gray water space, like similar to rain gardens, but not quite those, if that makes sense.
And but by gray water, do you mean like reusing sewage water for beneficial purposes?
Not sewage specifically, but if there's any sort of like cultivating rainwater, like on
Yeah.
larger scales, rather than just at like the community garden level, if there's any sort of interest in like sort of like a cultivation and retention for like when it's like when there's a drought to use some of that water, or to like cool pavements, things like that, where it's like not exactly drinkable, but not unusable.
Yeah, I don't know, and I think it's slowly emerging. Like I think on the city scale, it's been a lot of attention on bioswales to retain water that's running off of streets, and very limited attention on like more engineered solutions to retain volumes of water that could be reused. The rainwater tank is, I think, still it's an old thing people have been doing for a long time, but I don't think we have enough of them. And then the green roof is a similar way to hold on to water. But no, I think I'm not aware of much engineering to kind of collect water to reuse, particularly.
Thank you for that question, Mary. Anyone else? Y'all, we have listed quite a few resources in the chat. I want to remind everyone that this session was recorded and you will find it on Green Thumb platforms as well as NYRP platforms. Thank you so much, T, for putting in the chat what we shared earlier, that our next series edition of Facing Climate Change as Urban Gardeners will be on November 19th. It will be virtual. Look for the Green Thumb website and the NYRP website, which you will find more information in the coming weeks. And at that time on November 19th, we will talk about a topic that has been very impactful, very important to me personally and professionally. We will be talking about climate grief. Now, climate has been impacting many of us holistically, and some tangible ways that we can uplift our spirits, embrace grief together as a part of the life cycle, identify terms that we might be hearing that we just don't know what they mean, or we don't know that they're related to climate, and we hope that you will join us. Nigel, I am so proud of you. You were the conduit to introduce Seaweed City to us. I pass the baton to you to close us out.
Oh man, pressure to close out the session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Luke and Sean, for joining us tonight and diving deeply into this topic. It's been really great talking to you all over the last few months and spending time. And I'm super excited to see how we continue to work together moving forward and continue to bring this type of community education to the gardeners and New Yorkers here tonight. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, DK. Thank you, folks from Green Thumb. Thank you, Mel. Got a shout out, Mel. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening and you join us for our next session in November. So with that, I bid you all a good night.